As the cliche goes, April showers bring May flowers. But usually what comes after is the heat and dryness of summer. Hello again, Essay here. And before the hot weather of the holiday shows up, you should indulge in my new short story, The White Cat, a free exclusive on Substack. The links are down below in description. Join Margot Thompson, a beautiful stage actress and recent widow who finds salvation in the form of a white cat during a night of terror. While checking out my oddball thriller, remember that my Glitch series is still available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. The links are down below in the description. While you'll find my peculiar story about a white pussy entertaining, that doesn't mean I'm out of ideas. I still have more stories coming down the pike, so as long as I don't run into any mishaps, you'll see those stories as well. Now let's get back to the video. Hello again. Essay here. Ever since the beginning of the American Republic, we've always had journalism, newspapers. And even during the 19th century, newspapers usually had a byline, a set of guidelines. And indeed, many of them were straightforward. Because particularly during the middle 20th century, you had a lot of newspapers that were pro-slavery and some that were anti-slavery, run by the Quakers. And they didn't hint at it. They didn't pussyfoot around. They let you know straight up what they were about. But then there was this period during the days of Hearst and Carnegie. Yeah, I think it was Carnegie. No, sorry, not Carnegie. It was Pulitzer, where newspapers put on the pretense of being nonpartisan, not biased. Of course, that was also the time period when they had yellow journalism. But after that period, but then for the rest of the 20th century, it didn't matter if you were the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Washington Examiner, the Herald Examiner, and on, that when you reported on stories, particularly stories of a political nature, you tend to be nonpartisan. But then things changed in the late 20th century because during when I was growing up, you could see a shift going on. And indeed, that shift actually started up before I was even born, but when I was a little kid, you could tell there was a shift going on. Because back in the middle 20th century, the Los Angeles Times was known as a right-wing rag. True. No joke. In fact, I remember there was this great documentary about the Chandlers, people who owned the Los Angeles Times, and they said that old man Otis, the guy who originally started the paper, he was an old military man and a right-winger, and he basically set the byline for the newspaper. And even after his death, it was basically had a right-wing slant, and that continued all up until about the middle 20th century when the Otises took control of the newspaper. And no, the Chandlers did. And then things started to shift. And indeed, in that great documentary, it said that when JFK ran for president in 1960, The Los Angeles Times endorsed him, and they said that was the first time that the Los Angeles Times ever endorsed a Democrat. Before they just endorsed Republicans. And then, of course, finally, when Nixon became president, you definitely could see the shift. I mean, the reporting on the Watergate was definitely anti-Nixon. That doesn't mean that it was, but yet at the same time they did did a pretty good pretense of saying that, oh yeah, we're anti-Nixon because of Watergate. But the thing is, when Reagan came around, oh, they had nothing nice to say about Reagan. Indeed, the guy Conrad, you probably don't remember him. I remember him. He was the #1 guy in the editorial department. And I have to admit, I did like his editorial cartoons. They were funny. But he clearly had nothing nice to say about Reagan at all. Not once. Well, the thing is, since that time, things only gotten worse, not better. I mean, multiple people who know the journalism world, said that when you look at the political leanings of people who are in journalism, from the end of the 20th century to now, they tend to be left liberal. But then liberal morphed into leftist. And indeed, this I didn't know before, that most people in journalism tend not to be right-wing or even conservative. Now, of course, some of you are saying, oh, really? Or what about the New York Post or the Washington Examiner? Yeah. But the thing is, those publications, for the most part, are not really Republican. I mean, even the Wall Street Journal has a left of center bend. Only it's the editorial section that tends to have more like a center right leaning. I know it sounds kind of schizophrenic, but yeah, it's true. And the reason why this happened is because I remember Pat Buchanan long ago on the McLaughlin program. He said that when you look at the stats, most people who go to university and usually, get a university degree, usually in either in journalism or in literature, American literature, English literature, whatever. Those right wingers tend to go into speech writing, while the people who are left of center tend to go into journalism. Working for newspapers, working for legacy news outlets, ABC, CBS, NBC, and whatnot. And because you've had this weird shift going back and forth, that's why we have the situation we have now in legacy news media, where it's just all liberal and left wing, and there's very little right wing perspective at all. And of course, some of you are saying right now, oh, what about Fox News? Well, guess what? Fox News is basically the only game in town. Well, at least it was, I guess, until the last maybe 10 years. And you had the rise of Newsmax and was it OGN? I can't remember what the OGN means. I know that they were kind of prominent when Trump was president. And then, of course, you have a right side broadcasting. That's another small outfit that's been rising up to the top, which definitely has a center-right slant to it. But yeah, for a while there, if you want, particularly when George W. was president, if you wanted to get a right-wing perspective, you had to turn on Fox News. Because if you turned on anybody else, CBS, NBC, ABC, you were getting a center-left perspective. And yet, they kept putting on the pretense of being nonpartisan. And during the 90s and early 2000s, I would watch all these programs. And you could tell. I mean, I would watch Fox News and I would see the slant. You know, Bill O'Reilly. I could see the slant, the center-right slant. And yeah, I would turn on the CNN and I would see Anderson Cooper and Brian Stelter. And Christiane Amanpour and their clearly center-left slant. And even on the ABC News when Peter Jennings was still there. Now, Peter Jennings, good dude, but he wasn't a right-winger. In fact, the only person who was a right-winger at ABC News was Ted Koppel. But Ted Koppel, smart guy, but he wasn't even from the United States. He was from England. And he, long ago in an interview, said that he always kept his politics out of the newsroom. And indeed, if you watch the old Nightline show and watch all those old segments, you would never have known Ted Koppel was a right-winger. Never. Never, ever. The guy was very, very milquetoast. He basically wanted to know, he was like Jack Webb, you know, from the old Dragnet show, you know, just the facts man. But since George W. time, you just don't see that no more. And yet, these news organizations put on the pretense of, oh, we're nonpartisan, we're non-biased. It just ain't so. It just isn't so. I mean, look what happened recently over at MSNBC when they hired the woman who used to be the head of the RNC as a contributor. Everyone over there had a freak out. You know, Rachel Madison woman, damn Joe Scarborough, that, oh my God, that Joy Reid. All of them, they were just practically pulling their hair out and screaming until the woman got fired. And then they tried to pretend that, oh, they were angry not because she's a right wing or a conservative. They were complaining, saying, oh, she has something to do with January 6th. I said, oh, get out of here. That's not the reason. You don't like her because she's not like you. And that's it. Well, right now, I'm about to show you little videos from Jesse Waters' program where they talk to this guy who had been a long-time writer at NPR, and he basically spills the beans about the political bias at NPR. Okay, are you ready? Okay, here we are.
Last decade, NPR isn't even taken seriously by anyone. Last year, NPR canceled shows, laid off staff, and now only 30% of their own audience trusts them. How'd this happen? Well, one senior editor who's worked there for 25 years is confessing. Yuri Berlinder, a classic lib, says NPR has gone way too far. In an interview, he revealed how NPR corrupted itself in 2016.
I think like every newsroom, every legacy media newsroom, we were shocked, disturbed, distraught, really troubled. We assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win, and she didn't, and it was really an unsettling experience. But I also think, to me, it revealed that we didn't really understand a lot of what was going on in America, that we were out of touch.
He even admits NPR's news team coped with Hillary's loss by getting into bed with Adam Schiff.
I think after a while we started covering Trump in a way that like a lot of legacy news organizations, that we were trying to damage his presidency, to even find anything we could to harm him. And I think what we latched on to was Russia collusion, like a lot of news organizations, which was, as I write, sort of catnip, although it was just rumors and a lot of it based on pretty shoddy documents. We really latched on to Adam Schiff. He was like our muse to the Trump collusion story. We had him on constantly. And then the Mueller report came out and no collusion. And, I think we sort of learned to the story kind of disappeared.
So once the Trump-Russia collusion story was debunked, NPR pretended like it never happened. It's exactly how the government works. They use our tax dollars to mess things up and then act like it doesn't happen. But it didn't end there. He also admits that when COVID kicked in, NPR did everything it could to kill the lab leak theory. And then when the Hunter laptop bombshell dropped, NPR ignored it. Instead, they started pumping out an assembly line of liberal propaganda, trans, racism, climate, Republicans are bad. This was all being fueled by former NPR CEO John Lansing, who thought white people had to atone for their skin color. Lansing ratcheted up the DEI, made it clear he thought the country was racist, and told his reporters to spread that message.
It's a pretty big thing to say that America is infected with systemic racism. That's a big deal to say that. That would be a great starting point for reporting, looking for evidence, figuring out, is this true? Is it not true? Is it to what extent? But I think sort of a tone had been set instead.
The CEO set the tone and the rank and file followed. Reporters had to ask everyone they interviewed what their race, gender, and ethnicity was, and follow protocols set by the DEI board, like avoid using the term biological sex. Couldn't use that. NPR's workers seemed happy with the rules. Here's why.
At one point, I got so frustrated with what I saw was the sort of the lack of different perspectives in our coverage that I decided to look at voter registration among our staff. And what I found was 87 registered Democrats on our editorial staff, 0 Republicans. I presented this at a all hands or a large news meeting, and I said, hey, look, something's gone wrong here.
No Republicans, no problem. They didn't care there were no Republicans on the payroll. In fact, they preferred it. Remember, NPR is a taxpayer-funded news organization.
So I think we have a particular obligation to reflect America, to understand people from all different outlooks, to bring up things that might be uncomfortable for our progressive audience members, to be a little more daring, to take a little more chance, to be more curious about things that don't fit the narrative.
Vivek Ramaswamy is a former presidential candidate. Vivek, NPR just put out a statement saying they stand by their reporting and inclusion is very important in what they do. You're going to have to grapple with these types of people. I mean, it just doesn't stop. What's the strategy?
Well, look, in the name of diversity, they've eliminated diversity of thought. And in the name of inclusion, they've created this culture of exclusion, where certain points of view representing over 50% of the population in this country just aren't welcome. But on the positive side, Jesse, I want to say that took a lot of courage for that reporter, this guy, Yuri Berliner. I want to congratulate him. As a guy who probably disagrees with him on the substance of a lot of political issues, I still respect his willingness to come out and tell the truth. That takes courage. And I think NPR could take a page from his playbook if they look their own audience in the eye and say, we lied to you about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, Hunter Biden laptop, we're sorry about it, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. That's how NPR could have re-earned its trust. It's too bad the management squandered that opportunity.
Do you know how brave this guy is? He's still working at NPR. He still walks into the newsroom. He's just come out with this huge interview, this big piece, and he's just going to work like everything's fine. That takes courage.
And I respect the heck out of that, Jesse. And you know what? Our founding fathers, they had courage. What I found today is in America, you've traveled this country, people have common sense. Most people behind closed doors, probably even at NPR, believe what this man does. Americans don't lack for common sense. We lack for courage. And I think this man, despite being on the left, showed some courage in his move in this reporting today. And I think that whether you're on the left or right, when you're the only person in a room who believes what you do, you have an obligation to stand up and say it. And this guy did just that.
Well said, Vivek Ramaswamy. Always well said when Vivek's on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, you saw that, right? Now, of course, the funny thing is the fact that this guy is still working there and he had enough courage to come out and call out his own people is strangely refreshing. But then again, if you recognize the guy clearly must have been on the verge of retirement anyway. So I guess maybe that's what he's planning. I guess he's planning to walk out anyway. So I guess he figured he has no fear of retaliation. But still, the difference between NPR and all these other legacy news media is that it's government funded. And you say, so what? Well, it's a big deal because it's one thing if you're dealing with CBS News, it's a private company. But if you're dealing with NPR, that's basically a government funded organization. And you would figure if it's government funded, maybe it shouldn't be promoting a particular political view. I mean, you figure since they're taking government money, they shouldn't be doing that. Because I remember the Neil McLear News Hour when they started up back in the late 70s. In fact, if I remember correctly, they originally started out as they were doing original coverage on the Watergate hearings. But then when Watergate wrapped up, PBS continued McNeil and Lair as a regular news program. And even after McNeil and Lair both were retired in the 90s, I continue to watch them because they seem to be pretty straight up, pretty straightforward. But since that time, that Judy Woodworth who took it over, you could start even then you could see the liberal bias. You could, and indeed, when I was watching the news hour on the day that Trump first became elected president, and I knew something was off because they were not calling the election for Trump. And indeed, I remember noticing that over on CBS News, they were calling various states for Trump. You know, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia. And yet I go back and look at Judy Woodward, her reporting on the election night, and they were not calling these states. Even though it was obvious Trump had won these states, and I was wondering what's going on with these people. And then, of course, in retrospect, now I know why. These people who had taken over the old news hour on PBS, they were leftists and liberals, and they clearly were rooting for Hillary Clinton. And when they found out that Trump was winning, they made a conscious decision to say, no, we're not going to report that. And indeed, I think they didn't finally report it until like way after midnight when the writing was on the wall and they couldn't ignore it any longer. And this is bad. You know, this is not good. I mean, you can have partisan news organizations. There's no law against it. Especially if it's a private organization, you know, like the Los Angeles Times. Or like the old New York Globe from the turn of the century. But when you're dealing with a government bought and paid for organization, we can't have that. It's just wrong. It sets a bad precedent. Now, is it probably going to be fixed? I don't know. Because I think NPR as well as PBS is regulated by, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? Problem is, I think even that organization is corrupted. So it may take Congress to step in and basically audit both NPR and PBS to find out what's going on over there. And if they find out that, for loss of a better word, a bunch of leftists have hijacked those quasi-government organizations, then they're going to need to clean house, okay? Let's not even pretend. They got to go in there and start firing people. And basically, you know what they call right to ship, instead of having lean all to the left. Will Congress do that? I don't know. But we can't have this. Now, like I said, if you want to have a privately owned publication, news organization, you want to basically, preach to the leftist or liberal choir, hey, you can do that. But you can't be doing that with federal money, okay? That's just wrong. Well, that's all I got to say about NPR and their obvious liberal bias. That's my opinion.